Let's now expand on this. I'm joined by Kelly Phelps, who's a senior lecturer at the Department of Public Law at the University of Cape Town, for a discussion on some of these developments. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. Given that this was Oscar Pistorius' second parole hearing in under a year, what kind of consideration do you think had to be made ahead of this decision?
Just one correction. I'm no longer with the University of Cape Town as of March this year. I'm now a freelance criminal justice consultant. Lovely to be with you. The consideration would have been the exact same today as it would have been had the hearing proceeded earlier this year, and that is the parole board would squarely be concerned with whether it is firstly safe to release the offender, and that's both from the perspective of the safety of the public and also safety for the offender themselves, both from a physical and mental point of view. But most importantly, whether they feel that that offender has been sufficiently rehabilitated to be able to serve out the remainder of their sentence in the community. And that really is always the overwhelming priority playing on the minds of a parole board when they are considering anyone's application.
You speak about considerations around rehabilitation. June Steenkamp, who is the late Riva Steenkamp's mother, says she's convinced that she's not convinced that Oscar Pistorius has indeed been rehabilitated. What would happen in the instance where Pistorius would breach his parole conditions or reoffends, as that is put to the forefront with June Steenkamp's observation?
Yeah, so a few things to say here. First of all, parole is not the end of a sentence. It's serving out the remainder of a sentence in the community under strict conditions. And those conditions are in place precisely for the kind of scenario where if someone reoffended, they could then be removed again from the community and they're sent back to serve the remainder of their sentence in prison. So that's always a possibility. The second thing to notice there is you would expect a victim's family to say that. That's not unusual. One can completely understand with compassion why a victim's family would say that. But it should be noted that if the Department of Correctional Services did not believe that the offender had been rehabilitated, he in fact would not be granted this parole right now. So it's quite clear that the Department of Correctional Services and the other psychological experts that will have evaluated him and his case do believe that he's been rehabilitated. And of course, they are the parties who have been working closely with him throughout the whole of the sentence that he's served so far.
How much consideration do you think was given to the victim's interests and concerns in ensuring that they do indeed have the opportunity to be involved when there's a parole hearing and get a chance to have their say? In this instance, Riva Steenkamp's mother, June, who wrote a very emotional victim impact statement into the record through her lawyer, just spelling out what she feels throughout this entire process.
Look, it's always very important that the victim, or in a case where the victim's deceased, the victim's family, has a voice and has a say in parole. Of course, that can't be the final say, because if that were the case, we wouldn't be a system that follows the rule of law. If it were the case that individual victims can determine the passage of justice, then we'd have no consistency of justice and no rule of law, essentially. But that's not the same thing as saying just because they don't have the ultimate say, that's not the same thing as saying that their say isn't incredibly important. And the parole board would absolutely have considered it very closely, have taken it very seriously, and ultimately have done what they do with all of the submissions before the parole board, which is weigh all of them up in the balance against each other in determining where they feel the right outcome lies in a particular case.
And perhaps very lastly, just talk a little bit about some of the common parole conditions. I mean, you spoke and touched on it quite briefly, but what is to be expected when it comes to parole considerations and conditions?
So I haven't seen the conditions in this case, but speaking generally, it's very common to have, you will always have restrictions on movement, for example. A person will need to stay within a particular area. They'll need to have regular check-ins with their parole officer. and it will need to be ensured that they are abiding by those conditions. Usually, it's not uncommon to see things like prohibition against drinking alcohol or engaging in certain sorts of conduct. And oftentimes it also involves needing to show some form of employment, or that your time is being spent doing programs that benefit your continued rehabilitation and the beginning of your reintegration back into society. And also you will only ever be released to a specified address and under the care of a particular person or persons. So it will need to be continuously monitored and evaluated that is being abided by. But the key condition really is going to be the issue of reoffending as well, and that an offender cannot commit a closely associated offence that would then result in their sentence being ignited again and having to serve the rest of it in prison.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Kelly Phelps, who is a public law expert, weighing in on the Oscar Pistorius parole matter. Now,